So you don't have to buy property to get into property, but you can damn sure earn like you owned that property. Hey guys, do me the biggest favor, make sure you like, comment and subscribe. This helps to get my content out there. If you're getting value from my content, make sure you actually subscribe. Hey guys, hope you are doing fantastic. My name's TJ Atkinson and I wanted to talk to you about how to become a property investor. Well, in fact, let me rewind that, because most people get scared when they hear about property investing, because most people tend to believe the way to get into property is to save up a pile of money and a huge deposit, and then you become a buy-to-let landlord by finding 25% to put down as a deposit. Well, if I was to explain that one of my favorite strategies doesn't require you to put down any deposits, but in fact doesn't require you to actually buy a property. Now, before I tell you more about the strategy, and it's very important to understand this, I'm a big believer in ownership. I believe ownership is powerful. I believe ownership allows you to create a legacy. I believe ownership helps you to create wealth. But right now, if you cannot afford to put down a 25% deposit to get into property, then it's better that you listen up and let me explain a way that you can get into property and start building up your cash flow so you can save more and eventually go on to buy more. I teach a very niche strategy called rent to rent. Now, rent to rent is actually not difficult, so I'm not going to spend so much time explaining about the ins and the outs. It's actually quite simple. Essentially, if you want to get into property, what I'm trying to do here is to whet your appetite. Is to say, hey, you can start to make money from property, you can save more so you can go and buy more at a later stage. But I want to get you into property so you start to whet your appetite, you start to build up that desire, you start to build up your confidence. But this is where it gets a bit more interesting. You build up your confidence with somebody else's assets. So how rent to rent works is an investor or a landlord purchases a property. So they've done what you actually want to do, which is to go out there and buy property and own property. Now, the most popular property strategy in the UK is the buy-to-let strategy, which means that there are tons, if not thousands, of landlords that have bought a property and they've given that property to an estate agent, or they rent it themselves to people like you and I. They've bought the property, and the purpose of buying the property is twofold. They're hoping for capital appreciation, which is the value of the property going up. But in the meantime, while they're holding the asset, expecting to be paid rent every single month, which they use to pay for their lifestyle. So you become that person. You rent the property from the landlord or the estate agent in order to make sure the owner of the property receives their rental income. So that's rent to rent. It's, hi, Mr. Landlord or Mrs. Landlord, I would like to rent your property. With your permission, I would love to re-rent it out. So there are two forms of rent to rent. One of them, which you might find interesting, is rent to rent HMO. And the second one is rent to rent serviced accommodation. So again, let me explain both. Hi, Mr. Landlord or Mrs. Landlord, I would love to rent your property. With your permission, I'm going to re-rent it out to a number of different people. So I will take maybe a 3-bed house and rent it to maybe 4 or 5 different people, which means every single person gets a room, and me as the sub-landlord gets paid by those 4 or 5 different people. I take out the landlord's money, I take out my bills, I pay the landlord, and then I keep the difference. Then the second strategy, also that falls under rent to rent, is rent to rent serviced accommodation, or we call it rent to serviced accommodation. It's exactly the same thing. You go to a landlord that's put down a 25% deposit to purchase a property. This landlord is expecting a rental return. They're expecting someone to pay them rent every single month. You become that person. So you take on that property, and this time with rent to serviced accommodation, you say, hey, Mr. Landlord or Mrs. Landlord, I would like to take on your property. With your permission, I'm going to re-rent that property to my 4 different types of clients. And that's contractors, corporates, tourists, and leisure. And that's what I specialize in. And the whole idea is there are many people that want to get into property, but many people believe that the way to get into property is to go and find a big chunk of cash in order to put down and get into property. But that's a big old fallacy, and that's a big old lie. Because what tends to happen is when the goal is too big, you tend to get distracted, you tend to find another way to spend your money, You don't end up pursuing the goal because you say, my goodness, if I live in London, for example, in order to buy a property, and the properties in London are around £300,000 just as a starter property, you've got to find a £75,000 investment. But in fact, let me give you some examples of why myself and my students love serviced accommodation or rent to service accommodation as a strategy. Think about it this way. If I rent a property from a landlord for £1,200 per month, okay, which means I also have bills to pay. So I've got to pay gas and electric, I've got to pay for my internet, I've got to pay for my insurance. I re-rent that property to my 4 different types of clients, which are contractors, corporates, tourists and leisure. I charge them per night like a hotel would charge. So for example, think about it, as I mentioned before, 1,200 to the landlord, £300 for your bills, and then all I've got to do is re-rent this property out like a hotel for 21 nights. Now imagine I was charging £100 per night. So it means I generate 2,100. I pay the landlord the 1,200. I also deduct the bills, which is £500, minus all the other costs, and then I keep the difference. Which means you can potentially generate anything from £500 to £1,000 per month from somebody else's assets. Now that's not the end goal. The end goal is to get you to a place where you can now buy. Get you to a place where you now own. But before you can do that, you've got to increase your income so you can save more. So you can afford to hit that goal of buying a property a lot sooner. That's why I love rent to service accommodation, because it also means I don't have any liability. What that simply means to you is you can rent someone's property, and if the strategy doesn't work for you, you can give back the property. If you fall out of love with the strategy, you can give back the property. If you decide you no longer want to run the strategy, you can give back the property. And you give it back to the landlord, and the landlord will find somebody else to rent their property. Your job is to make sure the landlord is aware that you are the best candidate to rent their property. What every single landlord is looking for right now is the most suitable and the best candidate to rent their property. Most landlords would rather go with a professional or somebody that's going to look after their property. And the nature of what we do with rent to service accommodation means we're going to look after the property because it's got to be clean like a hotel cleans a property. So it means the landlord doesn't have to pay for a major refurb when they come to take back their property. What you want to do is find a landlord or an estate agent, explain serviced accommodation to them confidently, explain it in a way that they understand that it's in their best interest to work with you because you generate money from this property. And if you generate money from this property, it means you have the ability to pay the rent. Number 2, if you generate money from the landlord's property, it means you're going to look after the landlord's property. And guess what? These are the 2 things that landlords and estate agents want to hear. So your job's really simple. What you've got to now decide is how many of these properties do you need to acquire or rent or control or manage in order to hit your financial goal. So what we tend to do with my students and my mentees is we break things down in a logical sense. I find out from you, what is your financial goal? What is the figure? What are you currently earning? Because everyone says, hey, I want to jump out of my job. I want to quit my job. Hey, listen, don't listen to all that nonsense. The reality is this. If you want to get into property and you've got a job right now, you want to stay in your job. Truth. Because if you're going to rent a property, you're going to need to pass referencing. If you're going to buy a property, you've got to show pay slips. Okay, so let's not fly out of our employment until we've achieved what we want to achieve. So what we tend to do with my students is, hey, what are you currently on at the moment? What's your current salary at the moment? Okay, let's get you to a place that you're able to replace your salary. That allows you to make an informed decision to say, do I now want to stay in this job? Or do I want to now pursue this strategy on a full-time basis and then go on to increase my income further? Again, there are tiny things that you can do to ensure that you're still in your place of work or running your business and still run serviced accommodation. Don't get carried away by the noise of, hey, you can quit your job tomorrow. Why do you need to quit your job tomorrow when you're generating money on the side? Wait until this income replaces this income, then you can make an informed decision, because essentially what we're trying to do is buy back your time. If you can generate enough money to cover your salary, and you're doing it in half the time that you would have dedicated to your employer, then you've effectively bought back your time. Then you can make a structured decision to say, this strategy is what I want to pursue. This is how I'm going to go further and deeper. So again, guys, reach out to me. Let me know how I can help you. But as I said, this is, in my opinion, one of the fastest growing property strategies for people who don't have a ton of money. And if you don't have a ton of money and you want to earn an additional income, then you've got to start looking at the rent to service accommodation strategy, because there are thousands and thousands of landlords and estate agents out there that are looking for people like you to rent their property